People moved like ants, living their normal lives while his world crumbled. His secretary knocked on the door, but he could not find his voice to answer. How do you tell an 8-year-old that she might not see Christmas? For the past 5 years, since Sophie's mother died in a car accident, Richard had thrown himself into work. His business empire had grown larger, his bank account fuller, but he had missed soccer games, bedtime stories, and birthday parties. He thought providing for Sophie financially was enough. Now he realized he had wasted precious time. Have you ever wondered what you would do if you had only 3 months with someone you love? Subscribe and comment below with your thoughts, because this story will show you that sometimes the most powerful medicine isn't found in hospitals. The drive home to his Manhattan mansion felt like traveling through thick fog. Richard's hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel. Usually he would call his assistant to handle everything, but this was something he had to face alone. Sophie was waiting for him at home, probably wondering why Daddy looked so sad when he left for the doctor's appointment that morning. The massive house stood before him like a monument to his success, but today it felt more like a beautiful prison. The marble steps seemed to stretch forever as he climbed toward the front door. Inside, he could hear Sophie's laughter echoing from somewhere deep in the house. The sound that once brought him joy now felt like a knife in his heart. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly housekeeper, greeted him at the door. Her kind eyes immediately noticed his distress. "Mr. Thompson, how did the appointment go?" she asked gently. Richard could not form the words. He simply shook his head and walked past her toward his study. He needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to make these next 3 months count more than all the years he had let slip away. Sophie appeared at the top of the grand staircase, wearing a bright yellow dress that made her look like a little ray of sunshine. "Daddy, you're home early," she called down, her voice filled with excitement. "Can we play that board game you promised?" Looking up at his daughter's innocent face, Richard felt his chest tighten. She had no idea what was coming. Her smile was pure and trusting, just like her mother's used to be. How could he tell this beautiful child that her body was failing her? "Of course, sweetheart," he managed to say, his voice cracking slightly. "Let Daddy change clothes first." As Sophie disappeared back down the hallway, Richard leaned against the wall for support. Mrs. Patterson approached him carefully. "Sir, I've been with this family for 15 years. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." "She has 3 months," Richard whispered, the words barely audible. "Maybe less." The color drained from Mrs. Patterson's face, but she quickly composed herself. "Then we need to make them the best 3 months of her life," she said firmly. "But sir, you can't do this alone. Sophie needs more care than I can provide, and you need support too." Richard nodded slowly. She was right. He would need help, professional help. Someone trained in pediatric care, someone who could be there when he couldn't, someone who could help make Sophie's remaining time as comfortable and happy as possible. That evening, as he tucked Sophie into her bed surrounded by stuffed animals and fairy tale books, she looked up at him with those big brown eyes that reminded him so much of her mother. "Daddy, are you sad about something?" she asked, reaching up to touch his cheek. Richard's heart nearly broke. Even facing her own unknown future, his little girl was worried about him. "Sometimes grown-ups have worried thoughts," he said softly. "But what matters most is that I love you more than all the stars in the sky." Sophie giggled. "That's a lot of love, Daddy." "Yes, it is," he whispered, kissing her forehead. "More love than you'll ever know." As he closed her bedroom door, Richard made a silent promise. These next 3 months would not be about medical treatments and hospital visits. They would be about love, laughter, and creating memories that would last him a lifetime. He would find someone special to help him give Sophie the most beautiful end to her story possible. He didn't know it yet, but that someone was already on her way. 2 days later, Amara Johnson stood outside the Thompson mansion, clutching her small suitcase and taking a deep breath. The agency had called her yesterday about an urgent placement. A wealthy family needed live-in care for their daughter. They hadn't shared many details, but something in the woman's voice suggested this was more than a typical job. Amara had been working as a pediatric caregiver for 8 years, ever since she finished nursing school. At 32, she had cared for children with various needs, but each family became a part of her heart. She loved helping kids smile even during their toughest days. The mansion's front door opened before she could ring the bell. Mrs. Patterson appeared, her eyes red-rimmed but her smile genuine. "You must be Amara. Please come in." The interior took Amara's breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings and artwork covered the walls. But despite all the luxury, something felt cold and empty about the space. "This is quite a home," Amara said, adjusting her bright blue dress. "Mr. Thompson will be down shortly to meet you," Mrs. Patterson explained as they walked through the foyer. But first let me tell you about Sophie. She's 8 years old and she's... The older woman's voice broke. She's very sick. Amara had suspected as much. Families didn't usually need live-in care unless something serious was happening. What can you tell me about her condition? Before Mrs. Patterson could answer, a small voice called out from upstairs. Mrs. P, who's here? Someone I'd like you to meet, sweetheart, Mrs. Patterson called back. Light footsteps bounced down the stairs, and Amara looked up to see a beautiful little girl with curly brown hair and bright eyes. Sophie wore a pink dress with white flowers and had a small bandage on her arm, probably from recent blood work. Hi, Sophie said, studying Amara with curious eyes. Are you here to take care of me? Amara knelt down to Sophie's eye level, something she always did when meeting a new child. Hi Sophie. I'm Amara. I'm here to be your friend and helper. Is that okay with you? Sophie nodded enthusiastically. I like your dress. Blue is my second favorite color. What's your first favorite? Amara asked. Purple, but Daddy says it's hard to find purple clothes. Amara smiled. Well, I happen to know some great places to find purple clothes. Maybe we can go shopping together sometime. Really? Sophie's face lit up. Mrs. P, did you hear that? Amara knows where to find purple clothes. Mrs. Patterson chuckled, and for the first time since Amara arrived, the house felt a little warmer. I heard, sweetheart. That sounds wonderful. Heavy footsteps echoed from the top of the stairs. Richard Thompson appeared, looking exhausted and wearing a wrinkled business suit. His hair was messy as if he had been running his hands through it, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. Mr. Thompson, Amara said, standing and extending her hand. I'm Amara Johnson. Richard shook her hand briefly, his grip firm but distracted. Thank you for coming so quickly. I assumed the agency explained the situation. They mentioned Sophie needs special care, but I'd like to hear more details from you, Amara replied professionally. Richard glanced at his daughter, who was busy examining Amara's bracelet. Sophie, why don't you show Amara your room while I finish some phone calls? Can I, Amara? I have lots of books and stuffed animals, Sophie said eagerly. I'd love to see your room, Amara replied, taking Sophie's small hand. As they climbed the stairs together, Amara noticed how Sophie moved slightly slower than most 8-year-olds, and how she paused to catch her breath on the landing. The little girl's room was a princess paradise, with pink walls, a canopy bed and shelves full of books and toys. This is Princess Sparkles, Sophie said, picking up a purple unicorn. And this is Mr. Bear. He's been with me since I was little. They're wonderful, Amara said, sitting on the edge of the bed. Do you like to read these books? Mrs. P reads to me every night, but sometimes I get too tired to listen to the whole story, Sophie admitted. Do you think that's weird? Amara's heart ached. This sweet child had no idea how sick she was. Not weird at all. Sometimes our bodies need extra rest. That's perfectly normal. Sophie climbed onto the bed next to Amara. Are you going to live here now? For a while, yes. Is that okay with you? I think so. Daddy's been very sad lately, and Mrs. P cries when she thinks I'm not looking. Maybe having a new friend will make everyone happier. The innocence in Sophie's voice nearly brought tears to Amara's eyes. This little girl was worried about everyone else while facing her own challenges. I hope so too, sweetheart. That evening, after Sophie fell asleep, Amara found Richard in his study, staring at papers scattered across his desk. She knocked softly on the open door. Come in, he said without looking up. We need to talk about Sophie's condition, Amara said directly. I can't properly care for her without knowing what we're dealing with. Richard finally looked at her and she saw the pain he was trying to hide. She has dilated cardiomyopathy. Her heart is failing and there's nothing more the doctors can do. They've given her 3 months. The words hit Amara like a physical blow, but she kept her composure. I'm so sorry. That must be incredibly difficult for you. I don't need sympathy, Richard said coldly. I need someone who can help her have the best possible time while... He couldn't finish the sentence. While she's with us, Amara completed gently. And that's exactly what I'm here to do. Something in her tone made Richard look at her more closely. The agency said you have experience with pediatric care. 8 years. I've worked with children facing all kinds of challenges. Every child deserves to feel loved and happy, regardless of their circumstances. Richard nodded slowly. Sophie likes you already. She hasn't been this excited about meeting someone new in a long time. She's a special little girl. Tomorrow, I'd like to learn more about her routines, her favorite activities, and what makes her smile. Whatever she wants she can have, Richard said firmly. Money is not an issue. Amara chose her words carefully. Sophie doesn't need expensive things, Mr. Thompson. She needs time, attention, and love. Those are gifts that can't be bought. For the first time, Richard really looked at this woman he had hired. Amara Johnson was beautiful, but more than that, she had a warmth in her eyes that reminded him of someone he once knew. Someone who understood that the most valuable things in life had nothing to do with money. You're right, he said quietly. I'm just not sure I know how to give those things anymore. Then we'll learn together, Amara said with a gentle smile. For Sophie. The next morning, Amara woke before sunrise and quietly made her way to the kitchen. She found Mrs. Patterson already there, preparing coffee with shaky hands. Couldn't sleep either? Mrs. Patterson asked. I keep thinking about Sophie, Amara admitted, pouring herself a cup of coffee. She has such a bright spirit. I want to make sure we nurture that. Mrs. Patterson nodded. She's always been a happy child, even after losing her mother. But lately she's been more tired, sleeping longer. The doctors say that's normal, but it breaks my heart. Amara pulled on her cheerful red cardigan, choosing bright colors intentionally. Children responded well to warmth and energy, and she wanted to bring as much positivity as possible into Sophie's world. Around 8 o'clock, Sophie appeared in the kitchen wearing pajamas covered in tiny rainbows. Good morning, Amara. Did you sleep in your new room? I did, and it's very comfortable. How did you sleep, sweetheart? Pretty good. Sometimes my chest feels tight at night, but Mr. Bear helps me feel better, Sophie said, clutching her stuffed animal. Amara's nursing training kicked in. She made a mental note to ask Richard about Sophie's nighttime symptoms and whether adjustments to her medication might help. What do you like to eat for breakfast? Amara asked. Pancakes, but Mrs. P says they're too much work for every day. Richard had begun joining them for breakfast most mornings, though he remained quiet and distant. He watched his daughter's interactions with Amara with a mixture of gratitude and something that looked like envy. Amara had managed to bring out Sophie's laughter in ways he never could. On a rainy Thursday evening, everything changed. Amara was in her room, writing in her journal about Sophie's progress, when she heard a cry from down the hall. She rushed to Sophie's bedroom and found the little girl sitting up in bed, clutching her chest and struggling to breathe. Sophie, what's wrong? Amara asked calmly, immediately moving into nurse mode. My chest hurts really bad and I can't catch my breath, Sophie gasped between words. Amara quickly checked Sophie's pulse. It was rapid and irregular. She had been trained for this moment, but seeing it happen to Sophie made her heart race. I'm going to get your daddy and call the doctor, okay? Just try to stay calm. She pressed the emergency button that connected to Richard's room and called Dr. Peterson while Sophie continued to struggle with her breathing. Within minutes, Richard appeared in the doorway, his hair messy from sleep, wearing only pajama pants. What's happening? He demanded. Possible heart episode. Dr. Peterson wants us to bring her to the emergency room immediately, Amara said, already gathering Sophie's medications and emergency bag. Richard looked frozen, staring at his daughter as she fought for each breath. The powerful businessman who controlled million-dollar deals couldn't move when faced with his child's crisis. Mr. Thompson, Amara said firmly. I need you to get dressed and bring the car around. We have to go now. Her authoritative tone snapped him into action. While he rushed to get ready, Amara gently lifted Sophie into her arms. The little girl was lighter than she should be, another sign that her condition was progressing. Am I going to die? Sophie whispered against Amara's shoulder. No, sweetheart. We're going to get you the best care possible, Amara said, her voice steady despite the fear in her own heart. The ride to the hospital was the longest 20 minutes of Richard's life. Amara sat in the back seat with Sophie, monitoring her breathing and keeping her calm with soft words and gentle touches. Every traffic light felt like an eternity. At the emergency room, medical staff immediately took Sophie into a treatment room. Richard tried to follow, but a nurse stopped him. Family only in the treatment area. I'm her father, Richard said urgently. I'm sorry, sir, but we need space to work. The doctor will update you as soon as possible. Richard found himself in the waiting room, pacing like a caged animal. The sterile smell of the hospital and the fluorescent lighting made everything feel cold and hopeless. He had been in this same hospital when Sophie's mother died. The memories crashed over him like waves. Amara appeared beside him, having somehow managed to stay with Sophie longer. The doctors are running tests. They think it was an episode brought on by fluid retention. They're giving her medication to help. Is she? Richard couldn't finish the question. She's stable. Scared but stable. They sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs, watching the clock slowly tick away the hours. Richard kept checking his phone, then putting it down, then checking it again. "You don't have to stay," he said finally. "I can handle this." Amara looked at him with those warm brown eyes that somehow saw right through his walls. "Sophie asked me to stay. And besides, you shouldn't be alone right now. I'm used to being alone." "That doesn't mean you should be." Around 3 in the morning, Dr. Peterson appeared in the waiting room. Richard jumped to his feet immediately. "Sophie is stable," the doctor said. "The episode was serious, but we've managed to regulate her heart rhythm and reduce the fluid buildup. She's asking for both of you." They followed him through sterile corridors to Sophie's room. She looked tiny in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and 4 lines. But her eyes brightened when she saw them. "Daddy, you look scared," she said softly. Richard moved to her bedside, taking her small hand carefully. "I was scared. How do you feel now?" "Better. The medicine helps." "Amara, will you sing the song about the brave little bird?" Amara pulled a chair close to the bed and began singing softly. Her voice was clear and soothing, filling the sterile room with warmth. Richard watched as his daughter's eyes grew heavy and her breathing became more regular. When Sophie finally fell asleep, Richard and Amara moved to chairs by the window. Dawn was beginning to break over the city, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. "You knew exactly what to do," Richard said quietly. "I've been trained for emergencies, but I've never been as scared as I was tonight." "What? You barely know her." Amara turned to look at him. "I love her. I know that might sound strange after only 3 weeks, but Sophie has found her way into my heart. She's an amazing little girl." "She is," Richard agreed. "I just wish I knew how to show her that as well as you do." "What do you mean?" Richard ran his hands through his hair. "Look at tonight. When she needed help, I froze. You took charge and probably saved her life. I'm her father and I was useless. You were scared. That's normal. Is it normal to feel like a stranger to your own child?" The words came out before Richard could stop them. Amara studied his face. "Tell me about Sophie's mother." "Elizabeth was everything I'm not. Warm, patient, creative. She made everything beautiful just by being there. When she died, I thought I could make up for her loss by providing everything Sophie could ever want financially. I realize now that I was just hiding from my grief by working all the time. Sophie doesn't need you to be her mother, Richard. She needs you to be her father." It was the first time she had used his first name, and something about the way she said it made him look at her differently. "I don't know how to be that anymore. Start small. Show up. Be present. The rest will come." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun continued to rise. Sophie slept peacefully, her hand curled around Mr. Bear. The monitors beeped steadily, a reassuring rhythm that meant she was still fighting. "Amara," Richard said finally. "Thank you. For tonight, for everything. I know I hired you to do a job, but you've gone beyond that." She smiled. "Sophie makes it easy to go beyond expectations. Would you consider staying permanently? Even after what might happen with Sophie?" "Yes. I mean, I hope we don't need to think about that, but if we do, I don't think I can handle it without you." Amara reached over and touched his hand briefly. "Let's focus on making every day count." That's what Sophie would want. When Sophie woke up later that morning, she found her father and Amara asleep in chairs beside her bed. Both still wore yesterday's clothes and looked exhausted, but they had stayed with her all night. "Daddy," she whispered. Richard immediately opened his eyes. "Hey baby girl. How are you feeling?" "Much better. Are you going to stay home with me today?" Richard looked at his phone, thinking about the meetings he was supposed to attend, the deals that needed his attention. Then he looked at his daughter's hopeful face. "Yes," he said, putting the phone away without checking his messages. "I'm staying right here with you." Sophie smiled brighter than the morning sun streaming through the windows. It was a small step, but it was the beginning of something new. 2 days after the hospital stay, Sophie was back home but under strict instructions to rest. Richard had canceled all his meetings for the week, something his assistant couldn't believe. For the first time in years, someone else's needs were more important than business. He found Sophie and Amara in the sunroom, working on a puzzle together. Sophie was wearing a bright maroon sweater that made her cheeks look rosier, and Amara wore a soft green blouse that seemed to bring out the warmth in her smile. "Room for one more?" Richard asked from the doorway. "Daddy, we're making a picture of a castle," Sophie said excitedly. "Come help us find the corner pieces." Richard sat on the floor beside them, something he hadn't done since Sophie was very small. The puzzle was more challenging than he expected. and he found himself genuinely concentrating on finding pieces that fit together. "You're really good at this," Sophie told him after he connected several pieces. "Maybe you can help us with puzzles more often." "I'd like that," Richard said, realizing he meant it. After Sophie's afternoon nap, Amara found Richard in his study. He was sitting at his desk but staring out the window instead of working. "How are you doing?" she asked gently. Richard looked up at her. "I keep thinking about the other night at the hospital. How helpless I felt." Amara sat down in the chair across from his desk. "You weren't helpless. You were scared. There's a difference." Elizabeth would have known what to do. She always knew what to do with Sophie. "Tell me about her," Amara said softly. Richard leaned back in his chair, his eyes growing distant. "She was a kindergarten teacher when we met. I was this ambitious young businessman working 18-hour days, completely focused on success. She taught me that there were more important things than money." "What happened to her?" "Car accident 5 years ago. Drunk driver ran a red light. She was coming home from Sophie's school play." Richard's voice became strained. "I was supposed to go to that play, but I had a conference call with investors in Tokyo. Elizabeth said she understood, that she would take pictures for me to see later." Amara's heart ached for the pain she heard in his voice. "I'm so sorry. After she died, I threw myself back into work. It was easier than dealing with the grief, easier than figuring out how to be a single parent. I hired nannies and housekeepers and told myself Sophie was fine as long as she had everything she needed." "Grief affects everyone differently," Amara said compassionately. "But now Sophie is sick and I realize I've wasted 5 years. I barely know my own daughter's favorite color or what makes her laugh. You've been here a month and you know her better than I do." Richard stood up and walked to the window. "When the doctor first told me about Sophie's diagnosis, my first thought wasn't about losing her. It was about losing someone I never really got to know." Amara joined him at the window. Outside they could see the garden where Sophie liked to play. "It's not too late, Richard. You have time now." "Do I?" 3 months isn't very long to make up for 5 years of being absent. Sophie doesn't need you to make up for anything. She just needs you to be present now." Richard turned to look at Amara. "How do you do it? How do you make everything seem so simple?" "Because it is simple. Love isn't complicated. People make it complicated, but love itself is just about showing up and caring." Elizabeth used to say something similar. Richard paused. "You remind me of her sometimes. Not in looks but in the way you see the world. The way you see people." Amara felt a flutter in her chest but kept her voice steady. "She sounds like she was a wonderful person. She would have loved you. And she would have been so grateful that you're here for Sophie." That evening Richard did something he hadn't done in years. He went to Sophie's room at bedtime without being asked. "Daddy, you're here for stories?" Sophie said with delight. "I thought maybe I could read to you tonight," Richard said, sitting on the edge of her bed. Sophie picked up a book from her nightstand. "This is my favorite. It's about a little girl who goes on adventures with her stuffed animal." Richard opened the book and began to read. His voice was rusty at first, unfamiliar with the rhythm of children's stories. But as he continued, he found himself enjoying the silly characters and magical plot. "You're a good story reader, Daddy," Sophie said sleepily halfway through the book. "Thank you, baby girl. Should I keep going?" "Please." By the time Richard finished the story, Sophie was almost asleep. He tucked her blankets around her and kissed her forehead gently. "Daddy?" Sophie whispered. "I'm happy you're home more now." "Me too, sweetheart. Sweet dreams." As Richard left Sophie's room, he found Amara waiting in the hallway. She had heard the whole bedtime routine and was smiling. "How did it feel?" she asked. "Natural," Richard admitted. "I forgot how much I enjoyed reading to her when she was little." They walked downstairs together and Richard surprised himself by asking, "Would you like some tea?" "I was going to make some anyway." In the kitchen, they sat at the breakfast table where Sophie had made her flour pancakes weeks ago. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. "Can I ask you something?" Richard said. "Of course. Why do you do this work? Caring for sick children must be heartbreaking." Amara wrapped her hands around her warm teacup. "Because every child deserves to feel loved and valued, especially when they're facing difficult times. And because the families need support too." "Have you ever lost a patient?" "Yes," she said quietly. "It's the hardest part of what I do. But I've also seen miracles happen when families come together with love and hope." "Do you think Sophie?" Richard couldn't finish the question. "I think Sophie is a fighter with a lot of love surrounding her. That's a powerful combination. Richard looked at this remarkable woman who had brought light back into his home. I don't know what we would have done without you. You would have found a way. Love always finds a way. As they finished their tea, Richard realized something had shifted in his relationship with Amara. She was no longer just Sophie's caregiver. She had become someone he trusted, someone he looked forward to talking with, someone whose opinion mattered to him. Amara, he said as she stood to leave, thank you for helping me find my way back to my daughter. She smiled, and Richard noticed how beautiful she looked in the soft kitchen light. You were never really lost, Richard. You just needed someone to remind you of who you are. That night, as Richard lay in bed, he thought about his conversation with Amara. For the first time since Elizabeth's death, he could imagine a future that included more than just work and obligation. He could imagine laughter and family dinners and bedtime stories. He could imagine love. Some people believe that happiness comes from having everything you want. But what if the greatest joy comes from giving everything you have? Subscribe and let us know in the comments what you would do to make a child's dreams come true, because this story is about to show you the power of pure love. The next morning, Sophie woke with more energy than she'd had in weeks. The hospital stay seemed to have been a turning point, and while her heart condition remained serious, the new medication was helping stabilize her symptoms. Amara, can we have a tea party today? Sophie asked over breakfast. Not just a pretend one but a real fancy one? Amara glanced at Richard, who was actually sitting with them for breakfast instead of rushing off to work. What do you think, Daddy? Do we have time for a tea party? Richard looked at his daughter's hopeful face and made a decision that would have shocked his business partners. I think a tea party sounds perfect. But if we're going to do it, we should do it right. Sophie clapped her hands together. Really? With real teacups and fancy sandwiches? The fanciest, Richard confirmed. Amara was amazed. 3 weeks ago, Richard would have said he was too busy. Now he was volunteering to help plan a tea party. I have an idea, Amara said. What if we set up the tea party in the garden? We could use your mother's roses as decorations. Sophie's eyes grew wide. Like a fairy tale tea party? Exactly like a fairy tale. The three of them spent the morning transforming the garden into something magical. Richard surprised everyone by revealing a set of china that had belonged to his grandmother, stored away in the attic. The delicate cups and saucers were painted with tiny pink roses. Mrs. Patterson joined the effort, preparing finger sandwiches, small cakes, and real tea. Sophie wore her favorite dress, a bright maroon one with white lace that made her feel like a princess. We need costumes, Sophie announced. You can't have a proper fairy tale tea party without costumes. Amara went upstairs and returned with scarves, jewelry, and hats she had found in the dress-up trunk in Sophie's playroom. Soon, Sophie was wearing a sparkly tiara and pearl necklace, while Amara draped herself in a flowing blue scarf. What about Daddy? Sophie asked. Richard looked uncomfortable. I don't think I'm really the dress-up type. Please, Daddy? You could be the king of the tea party. How could he refuse those bright eyes? Richard found himself wearing a gold scarf around his shoulders and a makeshift crown that Sophie had made from cardboard and glitter weeks ago. The tea party was everything Sophie had dreamed of. They sat at a small table surrounded by blooming roses, eating tiny sandwiches and sipping tea from delicate cups. Amara told stories about brave princesses and wise kings, while Sophie giggled at her father's attempts to drink tea with his pinky finger raised. This is the most beautiful tea party in the whole world, Sophie declared, looking around at the garden and her two favorite people. Richard watched his daughter's face glow with happiness and felt something shift inside his chest. When was the last time he had seen pure joy like this? When was the last time he had felt it himself? Sophie, I need to tell you something, he said, setting down his teacup. What, Daddy? I'm sorry I haven't been around very much. I thought working hard and making money was the best way to take care of you, but I was wrong. The best way to take care of someone you love is to spend time with them. Sophie reached across the table and took her father's hand. It's okay, Daddy. You're here now. Yes, I am. And I'm going to stay here a lot more. Amara watched this tender moment between father and daughter, feeling her own eyes fill with tears. This was why she did this work, for moments like this when love broke through all the barriers people built around their hearts. That afternoon, while Sophie was napping, Richard found Amara in the garden, cleaning up from their tea party. Let me help, he said, gathering the china carefully. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, packing away the magical remnants of their morning. That was incredible, Richard said finally. I haven't seen Sophie that happy since before her mother died. She just needed her daddy to play with her, Amara replied. Children don't need expensive gifts or elaborate plans. They just need attention and love. Elizabeth always said that too. I wish I had listened better. Amara paused in her cleaning. You're listening now. That's what matters. Richard looked at her, this woman who had somehow become essential to his family's happiness. Amara, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Have you ever been married? Had children of your own? Amara's hands stilled on the teacup she was holding. I was engaged once about 3 years ago. He was a doctor I worked with. What happened? He wanted me to quit working with sick children. He said it was too depressing that I brought the sadness home with me. He wanted me to be a different person than who I am. I'm sorry. Don't be. I realized that if someone truly loves you, they don't try to change the fundamental parts of who you are. They support your passions even if they don't fully understand them. Richard nodded slowly. Elizabeth used to say something similar. She said love means celebrating each other's differences, not trying to eliminate them. Your wife was a wise woman. She was. Richard paused. Do you ever regret not having children of your own? Amara smiled sadly. Sometimes. But then I get to care for children like Sophie, and I remember that there are many ways to love a child. Biology is just one of them. Sophie loves you like family. I love her like family too. That evening, as they tucked Sophie into bed together, she looked up at both of them with sleepy, contented eyes. Today was perfect, she said. Can we have tea parties every week? Every week, Richard promised. With costumes and stories and fancy sandwiches. And you'll both be there? We'll both be there, Amara confirmed. After Sophie fell asleep, Richard walked Amara to her room. They paused outside her door, neither quite ready to end this perfect day. Thank you, Richard said softly. For today, for everything. You've given me my daughter back. You never lost her, Richard. You just needed to find your way back to each other. Standing there in the soft hallway light, Richard realized he was feeling something he hadn't felt since Elizabeth died. Hope. Not just hope for Sophie's recovery, but hope for himself, for their family, for a future that might include more happiness than he had dared to imagine. Good night, Amara. Good night, Richard. As she closed her door, both of them knew that something fundamental had changed between them. They were no longer just caregiver and employer. They were becoming something deeper, something that scared and excited them both. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, they had created magic in a garden full of roses, and nothing could take that away. A month had passed since the tea party, and Sophie's condition had remained stable. She had good days and tired days, but the love surrounding her seemed to give her strength. Richard had restructured his work schedule to spend mornings at home, and afternoons in the office only when absolutely necessary. It was during one of Sophie's afternoon rest periods that Amara made a discovery that would change everything. She was organizing Sophie's art supplies when she found a notebook tucked between coloring books. The cover was decorated with stickers and said, Sophie's Dream Book, in purple marker. Curious, Amara opened it and found pages filled with Sophie's handwriting and drawings. The first page read, Things I want to do someday, with a list beneath it. Meet a real author. Have a puppy for one whole day. See the ocean. Help other sick kids feel better. Make daddy laugh every day. Have a big birthday party with all my friends. Learn to bake a real cake. See snowfall. Go on an airplane. Make mommy proud in heaven. Amara's heart swelled as she read each item. These weren't requests for expensive toys or luxury vacations. They were simple wishes from a child who understood that experiences mattered more than possessions. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, Amara showed the notebook to Richard. She wrote all of this? He asked, flipping through the pages. Look at the dates. She's been working on this for months, adding new dreams as she thinks of them. Richard studied his daughter's handwriting, her careful drawings of puppies and airplanes and birthday cakes. Some of these things, with her condition. Some might be challenging, Amara agreed. But not impossible. Richard, what if we made it our mission to help Sophie experience as many of these dreams as possible? You mean like a bucket list? I prefer to think of it as a dream list. Something hopeful instead of final. Richard looked at the page again. Make daddy laugh every day. She's already accomplished that one. Amara smiled. She has, hasn't she? How would we even begin? Some of these require travel, and with her heart condition. We start with the ones we can do here and see how she responds. The doctors said gentle activities are good for her as long as we monitor her closely. Richard closed the notebook carefully. You really think we can do this? I think we have to try. Look at how happy the tea party made her. Imagine what fulfilling her dreams could do. Where do we start? Amara had been thinking about this since she first read the list. I have an idea, but I'll need your help and Mrs. Patterson's too. The next morning, while Sophie was having breakfast, Amara casually asked, Sophie, if you could meet any author in the whole world, who would it be? Sophie's eyes lit up immediately. Miranda Chin, who wrote the Princess Luna books. She's my favorite author ever. Why? Just curious, Amara said with a smile that made Richard suspicious. Later that day, while Sophie was playing quietly in her room, Amara explained her plan to Richard and Mrs. Patterson. Miranda Chin lives about 3 hours from here, Amara said, pulling up information on her laptop. She does school visits and charity events. What if we contacted her about meeting Sophie? You think she'd agree to meet with one sick little girl? Richard asked. I think most people have bigger hearts than we expect. The worst thing that can happen is she says no. Mrs. Patterson nodded enthusiastically. That child deserves to have her dreams come true. But even if she agrees, how do we get Sophie there safely? Richard worried. We take it slow, bring all her medications and stay in close contact with Dr. Peterson. It would be a day trip, carefully planned. Richard looked at these two women who had become so important to his and Sophie's life. Okay, let's try. Amara spent that evening crafting the perfect email to Miranda Chen's publisher. She explained about Sophie, about her love for the Princess Luna books, and about her dream to meet a real author. She attached a photo of Sophie reading one of the books, her face glowing with concentration and joy. 3 days later, they received a response that made everyone cry happy tears. Dear Sophie and family, the email read, I would be absolutely delighted to meet Sophie. In fact, I've been working on a new Princess Luna book, and I could use a young expert's opinion on the story. Would Sophie like to come to my home studio for a private visit? We could have tea and talk about princesses and stories. Please let me know what date works best for you. With love and excitement, Miranda Chin. When they told Sophie about the invitation, she could hardly believe it. She really wants to meet me? Miranda Chin wants to meet me? She really does, Richard said, showing her the email on his phone. Can we go tomorrow? Amara laughed. We need to plan carefully to make sure you feel well enough for the trip. But yes, we can definitely go. The next week was spent in careful preparation. Dr. Peterson adjusted Sophie's medications to help her have more energy for the trip. Amara packed a medical bag with everything they might need. Mrs. Patterson prepared snacks and drinks for the journey. Richard rented a comfortable van with extra space for Sophie to rest if she needed to. He had originally planned to send them with a driver, but Sophie asked him to come along. Please, Daddy? This is one of my biggest dreams. I want you to be there. So Richard cleared his calendar for an entire day, something that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. On the morning of the visit, Sophie wore her favorite bright purple dress and clutched a handmade card she had created for Miranda Chin. The 3-hour drive flew by as Sophie chattered excitedly about which questions she wanted to ask and which parts of the books were her favorites. Miranda Chin's home was a cozy cottage surrounded by gardens and trees. She met them at the door wearing a bright red sweater and the biggest smile. You must be Sophie, she said, kneeling down to Sophie's level. I am so happy to meet you. I love your book so much, Sophie said shyly, then held out her handmade card. I made this for you. Miranda opened the card and read Sophie's carefully written message. Thank you for writing stories that make me feel brave. This is the most beautiful card I've ever received, Miranda said, her eyes misting. Would you like to see where I write the Princess Luna stories? Sophie nodded eagerly and Miranda led them to her studio, a bright room filled with books, artwork and comfortable chairs. The walls were covered with sketches and notes for her stories. Sophie, I have a secret to tell you, Miranda said, settling them at a small table with tea and cookies. I'm working on a new Princess Luna book about a very brave princess who helps other children feel strong when they're scared. Would you help me make sure the story is just right? For the next 2 hours, Sophie and Miranda discussed princesses and dragons and magic kingdoms. Miranda showed Sophie the illustrations for the new book and asked her opinion on everything from the princess's dress color to her favorite spell. Richard and Amara watched in amazement as Sophie blossomed under Miranda's attention. She was articulate, creative, and confident in a way they had never seen before. Sophie, Miranda said as their visit was coming to an end, would it be okay if I dedicated this new book to you? You've helped make it so much better. Sophie's eyes grew wide. Really? A real book with my name in it? A real book with your name in it. On the drive home, Sophie fell asleep clutching the advance copy of the book Miranda had given her, along with a signed set of all the Princess Luna books. But more than the gifts, she carried with her the memory of being treated like an expert, like someone whose opinions mattered. That was incredible, Richard said quietly to Amara as they drove. Look at how confident she was, how articulate. That's who Sophie really is, Amara replied. She just needed someone to see it and believe in her. One dream down, several more to go. One dream down, several more to go. That night as they tucked Sophie into bed, she looked up at them with glowing eyes. This was the best day of my whole life, she said. Thank you for making my dream come true. We're just getting started, Richard promised, and he meant it. As Amara closed Sophie's bedroom door, she realized that they were all changing through this process. Richard was learning to prioritize joy over work. She was learning that families could form in unexpected ways. And Sophie was learning that her dreams mattered, that she mattered. Tomorrow they would start planning the next adventure. Word of Sophie's dream list spread in ways they never expected. Miranda Chin had been so moved by her visit with Sophie that she posted about it on her social media, sharing a photo of herself and Sophie working on the story together. The post went viral overnight. Look at this, Mrs. Patterson said, showing them her phone at breakfast. Miranda's post has been shared thousands of times. People are saying such beautiful things about Sophie. Sophie read some of the comments over Mrs. Patterson's shoulder. They're all saying nice things about me, she said in wonder. That's because you're pretty amazing, Richard said, kissing the top of her head. But the real surprise came that afternoon when Richard's assistant called with an unusual message. Sir, I've been getting calls all day from people who read about Sophie online. A children's book author wants to donate books to her. A local bakery wants to teach her how to bake. The fire station wants to give her a tour. There are more, but those are just from this morning. Richard was stunned. People are calling to help a child they've never met? Apparently so, sir. What should I tell them? Tell them I'll call them back. When Richard hung up the phone, Amara was watching him with knowing eyes. What are you thinking? She asked. I'm thinking that maybe we don't have to fulfill Sophie's dreams alone. That evening, they sat down with Sophie's dream book and made a plan. They would reach out to people in their community, not asking for charity, but offering opportunities for connection. The first call Richard made was to the local fire station. Chief Martinez? This is Richard Thompson. I understand you might be interested in meeting my daughter Sophie? Chief Martinez's warm voice came through the speakerphone. Mr. Thompson, my daughter read about Sophie online and made me promise to call you. Sophie wants to help other kids feel better, right? Well, we have a program where we visit sick children at the hospital. Maybe Sophie would like to come with us on one of our visits. You want Sophie to help you help other children? If she's up for it. Sometimes it means more coming from another kid who understands what they're going through. Richard looked at Amara, who nodded encouragingly. I think Sophie would love that. The next call was to Henderson's Bakery, a small family business that had been in their neighborhood for 40 years. Mrs. Henderson, this is Richard Thompson. I believe you called about my daughter Sophie? Oh yes, dear. I heard she wants to learn to bake a real cake. My granddaughter is about Sophie's age and she loves teaching other kids to bake. Would Sophie like to come in on a Saturday morning when it's quiet? We could make whatever kind of cake she wants. That sounds wonderful. And Mr. Thompson? No charge, of course. Some things are more important than money. By the end of the week, they had arranged visits to the fire station, the bakery, the local airport, where a pilot offered to show Sophie around a small plane, and the animal shelter, where Sophie could spend a day playing with puppies. But the most surprising call came from Dr. Peterson himself. Richard, I heard about what you're doing for Sophie. I have a colleague at Children's Hospital who runs a program where young patients make videos to encourage other sick children. Sophie has such a positive spirit. Would she be interested in participating? You want Sophie to help other sick kids? I think her message of hope could be very powerful. But only if she wants to do it. When they presented all these opportunities to Sophie, she could hardly contain her excitement. They all want to help me with my dreams? Real grown-ups who don't even know me? They know enough, Amara said. They know you have a good heart and big dreams. Can we do all of them? Richard looked at his calendar, which used to be filled with business meetings and conference calls. I think we can arrange that. Their first adventure was the fire station. Sophie wore her bright green dress and carried a small bag of homemade cookies she and Amara had baked for the firefighters. Chief Martinez greeted them warmly and introduced Sophie to the entire crew. They showed her the trucks, let her try on a child-sized helmet, and explained how they help people in emergencies. Sophie, we heard you like to help people feel better, Chief Martinez said. Would you like to come with us to visit some kids at the hospital tomorrow? We read stories and bring stuffed animals to children who are scared or lonely. I can really help? Sophie asked. You can really help. The next day, Sophie joined the firefighters on their hospital visit. Wearing a bright red t-shirt that said, Honorary Firefighter Sophie, she carried a bag of small stuffed animals to give to other children. In the pediatric ward, Sophie met kids facing their own health challenges. But instead of being sad or scared, she was encouraging and positive. I'm sick too, she told a little boy who was afraid of his heart surgery. But look at all the nice people who take care of us. And look at these cool firefighters who came to visit. Being sick doesn't mean we can't have adventures. Richard and Amara watched in amazement as Sophie brought smiles to children who had been withdrawn and frightened. She had a natural gift for connecting with others, for making them feel less alone. She's remarkable, one of the nurses told Amara. In 15 minutes, she's done more to lift spirits on this ward than we sometimes manage in days. The bakery visit was equally magical. Mrs. Henderson and her granddaughter Emma taught Sophie how to measure ingredients, mix batter, and decorate a beautiful chocolate cake. The secret ingredient is love, Mrs. Henderson told Sophie as they worked. When you bake with love, people can taste it. Then this cake will taste really good, Sophie said, because I'm putting in love for my daddy and for Amara and for Mrs. P and for you too. At the airport, pilot Captain Rodriguez showed Sophie around his small plane and explained how flying worked. He even let her sit in the pilot's seat. Sophie, flying is about having dreams and working to make them come true, he said. You're already doing that. The animal shelter visit was perhaps Sophie's favorite. She spent 3 hours playing with puppies, feeding them, and helping the staff care for the animals. Can we adopt all of them? Sophie asked, cuddling a small golden puppy. Richard started to explain why they couldn't, but shelter director Ms. Garcia interrupted. Sophie, we can't adopt them all, but we can help find them good homes. Would you like to make a video telling people about our puppies? Sometimes when kids talk about the animals, more families want to adopt them. So Sophie made her first of many videos, sitting surrounded by puppies and explaining why each one was special and deserving of love. Within a week of the video being posted, 6 puppies had been adopted. Sophie, you're a natural advocate, Ms. Garcia told her. You have a gift for helping others. Each adventure brought new energy to Sophie and new wonder to Richard and Amara. They were witnessing something beautiful, a community coming together to support one little girl, while that little girl used every opportunity to help others. She's not just fulfilling her dreams, Amara observed one evening. She's inspiring everyone around her to dream bigger too. Richard nodded. I'm starting to understand something Elizabeth used to tell me. She said that happiness multiplies when you share it. Sophie is proof of that. As they planned their next adventure, Richard realized that his daughter was teaching him about more than parenting. She was teaching him about purpose, about what really mattered in life, about the power of love to create miracles. And the biggest miracle of all might be the way his heart was opening not just to Sophie, but to the remarkable woman who had helped make it all possible. 2 months had passed since Sophie's dream list adventures began, and her story had touched more lives than they could have imagined. Videos of her hospital visits, her puppy advocacy work, and her cheerful spirit had spread across social media, bringing messages of support from around the world. But despite all the joy and activity, Sophie's medical team was cautiously concerned. Her latest tests showed that her heart was working harder than before. Dr. Peterson called a meeting with Richard and Amara to discuss the results. Sophie is stable, but her heart function has declined slightly, he explained gently. The good news is that there's an experimental treatment program starting at Johns Hopkins that might be appropriate for her condition. Experimental? Richard asked, his businessman instincts making him wary. It's a new procedure that's shown promising results in early trials. But Richard, I need you to understand that it's not guaranteed, and there are risks involved. What kind of risks? Amara asked. The procedure itself is complex heart surgery. For some children, it provides significant improvement. For others, he didn't need to finish the sentence. They all understood. How much time do we have to decide? Richard asked. A few weeks. Sophie's condition isn't immediately critical, but we don't want to wait too long. That evening, Richard and Amara sat in his study, trying to process the information. What do you think? Richard asked. I think it's Sophie's decision to make, Amara said carefully. She's old enough to understand her situation and what the options mean. How do we explain this to an 8-year-old? Honestly, kids are stronger than we think, and Sophie deserves to know what's happening to her own body. Meanwhile, Sophie was in her room working on something secret. For the past week, she had been writing letters with Mrs. Patterson's help, but she wouldn't tell anyone what they were about. The next morning, Sophie came to breakfast with an announcement that surprised everyone. "I want to have a party," she said, sitting down at the table wearing her favorite bright maroon dress. "What kind of party, sweetheart?" Richard asked. "A thank you party. For all the people who helped make my dreams come true. I want to invite Chief Martinez and Mrs. Henderson and Captain Rodriguez and Ms. Garcia and Miranda Chin and everyone who was so nice to me." Amara and Richard exchanged glances. "That's a beautiful idea, Sophie. When were you thinking?" "Next weekend." "Before?" Sophie paused, then continued carefully. "Before I have to go to the hospital for my big surgery." Richard nearly dropped his coffee cup. "Sophie, what do you know about surgery? I heard you and Amara talking to Dr. Peterson. I know my heart needs fixing and I know it might not work." Sophie's voice was calm and matter-of-fact. "But I'm not scared. I want to have a party first so I can thank everyone." Richard felt his world spinning. How could his 8-year-old daughter be so composed about something so terrifying? "Sophie, we haven't decided about the surgery yet," Amara said gently. "But I have," Sophie replied. "I want to try to get better. And if it doesn't work, at least I tried. Mommy always said we should be brave and try our best." That afternoon, while Sophie was napping, Richard called Dr. Peterson. "She wants to have the surgery," he said. "She overheard us talking and made her own decision. How do you feel about that?" Dr. Peterson asked. "Terrified, proud, amazed, all at the same time. Sophie is remarkable. In my 30 years of practice, I've rarely met a child with such courage and clarity. When can we schedule it?" "I'll make some calls. Probably in 2 weeks." Richard hung up the phone and found Amara waiting for him. "Are we doing the right thing?" he asked. "We're honoring Sophie's choice. That's what love looks like." The next week was a whirlwind of party planning. Sophie had very specific ideas about what she wanted. She wanted the party in the garden, with fairy lights and her mother's roses. She wanted all her new friends there and she wanted to give each of them a special thank you gift. Mrs. Patterson helped Sophie make personal cards for each guest. Miranda Chin got a card with a drawing of Princess Luna. Chief Martinez received a card with a fire truck. Mrs. Henderson's card featured a birthday cake. But the most touching part was Sophie's decision to make a video message for all the children she had met during her hospital visits. "Hi friends," she said, sitting in the garden wearing her bright blue dress. "I want to tell you something important. Sometimes scary things happen like surgeries or treatments that make us nervous. But you know what I learned? When we're brave and we have people who love us, we can handle anything. I'm going to have surgery soon and I'm a little scared, but I'm also excited because maybe it will help me feel better. Remember that you're braver than you think you are, and there are so many people who care about you. Keep believing in your dreams just like I believed in mine." The video was shared on the hospital's website and social media accounts, bringing hope to families facing their own challenges. The party day arrived with perfect weather. The garden was transformed with twinkling lights, colorful tablecloths, and arrangements of Sophie's mother's roses. Richard had hired a small catering company, but Sophie insisted on helping make some of the food herself. As guests began arriving, Richard was overwhelmed by the turnout. Not only had all of Sophie's new friends come, but many had brought their families. The fire station crew came in uniform. Mrs. Henderson brought Emma and her entire extended family. Miranda Chin drove 3 hours just to be there. But the biggest surprise came when Dr. Peterson arrived with a special guest. "Sophie, I'd like you to meet Dr. Williams from Johns Hopkins. She's going to be performing your surgery next week." Dr. Williams was a kind woman with gentle eyes who knelt down to Sophie's level immediately. "Sophie, I've heard so much about you. I'm honored to be your surgeon. Are you good at fixing hearts?" Sophie asked directly. "I'm very good at it. And I'm going to take excellent care of you." "Good. I have more dreams to fulfill after I get better." As the party continued, Richard watched his daughter move through the crowd like a little hostess, thanking everyone for coming and making sure they felt welcomed. She was tired, he could see that, but she was also radiant with happiness. Miranda Chin approached Richard during the party. "Mr. Thompson, I have something to tell Sophie, but I wanted to check with you first." "What is it?" "The new Princess Luna book is being published early because of Sophie's influence. The publisher wants to dedicate the entire book to her, and they want to donate a portion of the proceeds to pediatric heart research." Richard felt tears well up in his eyes. Sophie will be thrilled. When Miranda made the announcement to the whole party, everyone cheered. Sophie blushed and smiled, looking overwhelmed by all the attention. "Thank you," she said in her clear, sweet voice. "This is the best day ever." As the party wound down and guests began to leave, each person stopped to hug Sophie and wish her luck with her surgery. The outpouring of love was so overwhelming that even Richard found himself crying. Later that evening, as they cleaned up the garden, Sophie sat with Amara and Richard at the small table where they had held their first tea party months ago. "Thank you for the most beautiful party," Sophie said. "And thank you for helping me with all my dreams." "You made it easy," Richard said, pulling her into his lap. "You're the bravest person I know. I learned that from you and Amara. You showed me that love makes everything possible." As they sat in the garden surrounded by roses and fairy lights, Richard realized that regardless of what happened with the surgery, they had already received the ultimate gift. They had learned how to love completely, how to live fully, and how to find joy even in the midst of uncertainty. Sophie had taught them that life wasn't about how long you had, but about how much love you packed into the time you were given. And they had packed their time full to overflowing. 6 months after Sophie's surgery, Richard stood at the kitchen window watching his daughter play in the garden. She was running around with Benny, the golden retriever puppy they had adopted from the shelter, both of them chasing butterflies and laughing. The surgery had been touch and go for several frightening hours. Richard and Amara had sat in the waiting room holding hands, barely speaking, just supporting each other through the longest day of their lives. When Dr. Williams finally appeared with a tired but genuine smile, they both cried with relief. "The surgery was successful," she had said. "Sophie's heart is responding beautifully to the repair. She's going to need time to recover, but I'm very optimistic about her future." The recovery had been challenging but full of small miracles. Sophie had approached physical therapy with the same determination she had shown in everything else, celebrating every milestone no matter how small. "Look, Daddy, I can run again," she had said the first time she made it across the hospital hallway without getting winded. Now, watching her play with boundless energy, Richard could hardly believe they had come so close to losing her. "She looks strong," Amara said, joining him at the window. She wore a bright green dress that brought out the warmth in her eyes, and Richard's heart did that little flutter it always did when she appeared. "Dr. Williams says her heart function is better than they dared hope for," Richard replied, slipping his arm around Amara's waist in a gesture that had become natural over the past months. Their relationship had evolved slowly, carefully, with Sophie's well-being always the priority. But somewhere between the hospital visits and the tea parties, between the scary nights and the joyful adventures, they had fallen in love. "Daddy, Amara, come play with us," Sophie called from the garden, waving them outside. They joined her and Benny on the grass, and soon all 4 of them were running around the garden, playing an elaborate game of tag that Sophie had invented. "I have an announcement," Sophie said when they finally collapsed on the grass, all breathing hard and giggling. "What's that, sweetheart?" Richard asked. "I've been working on a new dream list." Amara and Richard exchanged amused glances. "Oh really? What's on this new list?" Sophie pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. "Well, first I want to keep helping kids at the hospital. Dr. Peterson says I can be a special volunteer now that I'm feeling better." "That sounds wonderful," Amara said. "And I want to learn how to train Benny to be a therapy dog so he can visit sick kids too." "Great idea." "And I want Daddy to teach me about business so someday I can help run companies that help people." Richard raised his eyebrows. "Really? You want to learn about business? But not the boring kind of business. The kind that makes people's dreams come true. I think I can teach you that kind of business." Sophie looked at her list again. "And I want Amara to be my mommy." The words hung in the air for a moment. Richard felt his heart stop, and beside him, Amara went very still. "Sophie," Amara started. "I know she can't replace my first mommy and I don't want her to. But I think people can have more than one mommy if they're really lucky. And I think my first mommy would like Amara because she makes Daddy smile and she takes really good care of us." Richard looked at Amara, seeing the tears in her eyes that matched his own. "Sophie, that's a beautiful thing to say, but becoming a family is something grown-ups have to decide together." "Have you decided?" Sophie asked with the directness that always amazed them. Richard took Amara's hand. "Amara, I know we've talked around this subject, but Sophie's right. We've become a family in every way that matters. I love you, and not just because you saved my daughter's life, but because you saved mine too. You taught me how to be present, how to prioritize love over everything else." Amara wiped tears from her eyes. "I love you too, Richard. Both of you. I never expected to find a family when I took this job, but that's what happened." "So will you marry Daddy?" Sophie asked impatiently. "Because I already picked out a dress for the wedding. It's purple." Richard laughed. "Sophie, I haven't even proposed yet." "Well, hurry up then." Right there on the grass, with Sophie and Benny as witnesses, Richard took Amara's hands in his. "Amara Johnson, you brought light back into our lives when we needed it most. You showed us that love is about showing up, being present and caring for each other through everything life brings. Will you marry us? Will you be my wife and Sophie's second mommy?" "Yes," Amara whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." Sophie cheered and hugged them both, and Benny barked and wagged his tail as if he understood that something wonderful was happening. 3 months later, they had the wedding in the garden, surrounded by roses and the people who had become their extended family. Sophie wore her purple dress and served as maid of honor. Chief Martinez walked Amara down the aisle since her own father had passed away years earlier. Mrs. Henderson made the wedding cake. Miranda Chin read a poem about love and second chances. Sophie's first mommy was honored too, with a special memorial candle and her favorite roses incorporated into the decorations. Richard had worried that celebrating new love might feel like betraying Elizabeth's memory, but Amara helped him understand that love wasn't finite. Opening their hearts to new love didn't diminish what came before. "Elizabeth would want you both to be happy," she had said. "Love creates more love, it doesn't replace it." As they exchanged vows in front of their friends and family, Richard marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he had been a workaholic billionaire who had lost connection with his own daughter. Fear and grief had made him hide from life. Now he was a man who knew what truly mattered. Time with people you love, presence over presence, and the courage to keep your heart open even when life is uncertain. Sophie's health continued to improve, though they maintained regular checkups and careful attention to her heart condition. She became a regular volunteer at the Children's Hospital, bringing joy and encouragement to other young patients. Benny eventually became a certified therapy dog, and the two of them made weekly visits together. Sophie's story had inspired the creation of the Sophie Thompson Foundation, which helped fulfill dreams for children facing serious illnesses. Richard found himself passionate about this work in ways he had never been passionate about making money. "Daddy, do you ever miss the old days when work was more important?" Sophie asked him one evening as they worked together on foundation business. "Never," Richard said without hesitation. The old me didn't know what he was missing. What was he missing? Everything that matters. Love, laughter, purpose, connection. "You and Amara taught me that success isn't about how much money you have. It's about how much love you give and receive." Sophie nodded seriously. "That's going to be in my book." "Your book?" "The book I'm writing about our adventures. Miranda Chin is helping me. It's going to be called, How Love Makes Dreams Come True." Richard smiled, thinking about how perfectly that title captured their story. Sophie had indeed learned that love makes dreams come true, but she had also taught everyone around her that same lesson. As he tucked Sophie into bed that night, with Benny curled up at the foot of her bed and Amara humming softly in the bathroom, Richard felt the kind of contentment he had never known was possible. "Daddy?" Sophie said sleepily. "I'm glad I got sick." "Sophie, why would you say that?" "Because if I hadn't gotten sick, you wouldn't have hired Amara, and we wouldn't have learned how to be a real family. Sometimes scary things lead to wonderful things." Richard kissed his daughter's forehead, amazed once again by her wisdom. "You're absolutely right, baby girl." "And Daddy?" "I have one more dream." "What's that?" "I want to be a big sister someday." Richard chuckled. "We'll see what we can do about that." As Sophie drifted off to sleep, Richard reflected on how completely his life had transformed. He had started this journey thinking he needed to save his daughter's life. Instead, she had saved his. Love had made all the difference. Love and the courage to let it change everything.